Hello and welcome back to another installment of Air Action Weekly's Spicy Air Tales. I'm Dave Davis Patterson, and this week we have a great show planned for you with the help of my friends in the AEW studio, presenting the first installment of Charlie Steele and the First Knights. A tale of how the dazzling stunt-flying socialites of the nation of Hollywood first came to be. Joining me today we have our narrator, Miss Nancy Warner.
It was a dark and stormy night to do a radio show.
And we won't let the weather get us down. Next we have the brothers Kim and Fin-Chin, playing the mysterious Wu Yin and his master, both members of the notorious Sky Slavers.
Master, the new Hollywood government seems to have no idea of our existence. That is good news. We shall soon take advantage of the situation.
We shall certainly see what the Hollywood Knights have to say about that. Next we have the venerable Edward Steele, being voiced by Roger Flatt, a regular here on our programs.
I don't want to stop the party for very long. I just wanted to let you know I'm here.
As for our star of the show tonight, playing the gorgeous Charlie Steele, an up-and-coming actress from the silver screen today, Miss Ashley Hyde.
Can't wait to stretch my wings and fly.
And last but not least, I'll be voicing One Reed Champion, a businessman from the busy air lanes of Manhattan. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Pepsi Cola, it's the pot, 12 ounces, that's a lot, twice as much more nickels do. Pepsi Cola is the drink for you. Nickel, 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 nickel.
Now, without further ado, AEW presents Charlie Steele and the First Knights Chapter 1. Nancy, please take us away.
Everyone has heard of the world-famous Hollywood Knights, the elite aerial militia which defends the skies over the nation of Hollywood. Without a doubt the flashiest squadron in the air, the Knights have also proven to be tough, savvy flyers. Their recent defeat of a large Diamondback pirate squadron from Mexico has received a lot of publicity, as have their ongoing struggles with the Skyhawks of Pacifica. What many people don't know, however, is that the now numerous squadrons of the Knights began with a single plane and a very determined young lady. When Hollywood first declared its independence on October 6, 1930, most people assumed that its greatest threat would come from the then still united U.S. government trying to take back the valuable territory. Little did they realize that the first threat with which Hollywood would have to deal would come from a much closer and far more sinister locale. This is the story of the threat that brought the Hollywood Knights onto the silver screen of Hollywood history. The scene was a noisome alleyway in San Francisco, the northernmost metropolis of the new Hollywood nation. The season, early December, 1930, the time, midnight. A rat scurried down the alleyway, its whiskers twitching. Too late, it sensed a flicker of movement behind it, and turned just in time to see the rapidly approaching slipper-shod foot that kicked it neatly down the length of the alley, where it slammed into the wall and dropped to the ground. Wu Yin's eyes glittered with brief amusement as he glided down the alley, past the still-twitching rat, and through a door marked "No Admittance" in Chinese. This might not have proven much of a deterrent to the thieves who made this part of the San Francisco waterfront their home, but the small symbol of a black dragon at the bottom did. No thief had ever dared to pass through those doors. Wu Yin passed through several elaborately decorated rooms, each more opulent than the last, and each guarded by several of the Tong's most elite warriors. In the anteroom outside of a large audience chamber, he paused and composed himself. It was never pleasant or safe to bring bad news to the master, but that was just what he was about to do. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the gilded doors and entered. As always, Wu Yin was first assaulted by the mixed sense of incense and opium which filled the air. The walls of the room were covered with silken hangings that seemed to be continually rustling, although there was no breeze. The master sat on a low lacquer throne in the shadows at the far end of the room, his corpulent form filling even its generous dimensions. At his feet lay two scantily clad concubines, their glazed-over eyes full of opium-induced visions. Wu Yin noted that one of them was still wearing chains. A new slave, he realized, one who had yet to succumb to the inevitability of her slavery. Wu Yin bowed before the master, who said, in his rumbling voice,
What is it? What is the bad news?
Without raising his head, Wu Yin answered,
In many respects, all is going well. Master, the new Hollywood government seems to have no idea of our existence, or at least is far too busy to concern itself with us. In local politics, Mayor Alioto sends his regards and thanks.
Wu Yin, this is old news. I know all of this. I want to know what it is that is causing your knees to tremble, and your sweat to stain the beautiful silk coat I gave you.
It is the White Lotus, Master. They have raided the House of Joy and released all the girls there. This now gives them control of all harlotry in San Francisco.
Wu Yin remained still, with his head bowed, awaiting the explosion, or perhaps even the heavy hands that would encircle his neck and snap it, but they never came. Wu Yin hazarded a glance at the master and was amazed to see him smiling.
That is all right, young one. Let the White Lotus triumph for now. I have been devising a plan. Tell me, what do we offer at the House of Joy?
We offered women resembling the actresses from the movies. Men paid very well to fulfill the fantasies they had seen on the screen.
Oh, but what do you think they would pay for the real thing, little one?
But Master, how would we ever get our hands on?
The master chuckled.
You just leave that to me. As I said, I have a plan. That takes us into our first break. The story will continue after these messages.
I like aeroplane jelly. Aeroplane jelly for me. I like it for dinner. I like it for tea. A little each day is a good recipe. I like aeroplane jelly. Aeroplane jelly for me.
And now back to the show. As we drop in with Charlie Steele herself.
We open in an exclusive aviators club in downtown Hollywood, the windows glowing a bright, exciting yellow. Inside, a hectic party shakes the window panes. Hollywood had a lot to celebrate in those days. Independence from the United States had been declared a few months ago, and the tension as to whether the U.S. government was going to do anything about it was abating. It was becoming increasingly clear that the weak government in Washington had far too many problems of its own to worry about trying to bring back the errant states that followed Texas into independence. The new nation had been celebrating ever since the Articles of Separation were signed in the new Capitol building at Hollywood and Vine, but tonight was going to be the big one. Okay, the guest of honor wasn't there. Howard Hughes was supposed to have shown up to accept yet another award for breaking yet another aviation speed record, but Howard hadn't been seen much since he had moved his home up to the large Zeppelin, which circled lazily over Hollywood. It was rumored that he had telescopes up there trained on the apartments of his various protégés so that he could always keep an eye on them. It was also rumored that the bigwigs in the Hollywood government were doing their best to acquire the support of the famous aviator for some kind of aerial militia of which the new nation was desperately in need. But that was all politics, and therefore unimportant to the glitterati who were assembled in the Aviators Club tonight. What was important was that the champagne was cold, the band was hot, and Charlie Steele was there. Anybody who was anybody in the glitter capital agreed that when it came to making a party happen, Charlie had no equal in Hollywood, which meant of course no equal in the whole wide world. As usual, Charlie was surrounded by a pack of admirers. Her gorgeous figure, topped by a helmet of platinum hair, was enough to lure any man, but she combined these features with a quick wit and devastating tongue, which seemed to attract admirers like a cargo zeppelin attracted bullets. The band brought its number to a swinging end, and Edward Steele stepped to the microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
The room immediately quieted down. This was, after all, Edward Steele, the host of the party, the most powerful producer in Hollywood, and one of the movers and shakers in the new Hollywood government. He was not a man you wanted to cross, so when he said to listen, you listened.
I don't want to stop the party for very long. I just wanted to let you know that the question of the name for our new nation has finally been settled. A lot of people, particularly the old Spanish land grant families, have been holding out for a return to the old Republic of California.
A few scattered cheers came from a group in the corner of the room.
I know. but the council felt that we needed a new name, a name that reflected who we are today. So, as of 10 o'clock this morning Hollywood time, we are all citizens of, drum roll please, the nation of Hollywood.
Raucous cheering broke out from the crowd, who identified much more strongly with New Hollywood than with Old California. The fact is, most of them didn't care one way or another about the new nation, as long as it kept its nose out of the movie business and kept the skies clear of pirates. The band started up again. From across the crowded room, Edward Steele tried in vain to attract his daughter's attention. Apparently oblivious to his calls and waves, Charlie continued to foxtrot away, although it was hard to tell exactly which of the men crowded around her she regarded as her dance partner. Eventually, Edward had had enough and plowed through the ranks of his daughter's admirers.
Charlotte, will you please come over here for a moment? There's someone I want you to meet.
Annoyed at being interrupted in the middle of the dance, Charlie said,
Oh, Dad. All right, if it's that important, I'll come and meet your silly old friend.
The last part of her remark was directed at the man standing by her father's side. Tall and slender, with black thick slicked back hair and cool green eyes, he was far and away the handsomest and best-dressed man in the room. Just the sort of guy that Charlie loved as often as possible. Her first thought was,
This one could be a keeper.
Charlotte, I'd like you to meet Mr. Reed Champion. Reed is out here from the East Coast on business. He's worked with my associates out there, so I invited him to join us this evening. I have other guests to attend to, so I'll leave you two alone to get acquainted.
Edward Steele winked as he made a hasty retreat, leaving his daughter and Reed alone on the crowded dance floor.
Well, that was certainly subtle. I apologize for my father. How do you do? Champion, was it? Girls out east must all be in mourning over losing you, but their loss is definitely our gain. I'm sorry that Mr. Hughes doesn't seem to be here tonight. He's the guest of honor, you know.
As far as I'm concerned, Miss Steele, the only really important guest is standing right here.
Oh, you're good. So, where are you going to take me first?
Where would you like to go?
Charlie slipped her arm through Reed's.
You know, Mr. Champion, you show some real possibilities.
And that takes us back to another sponsored segment. Stay tuned for this week's thrilling conclusion to the first segment of Charlie Steele and the First Knights.
Pepsi Cola hits the spot. 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel, too. Pepsi Cola is the drink for you.
We are back for the last portion of today's chapter of Charlie Steele and the First Knights. We rejoin our heroine a few weeks later as she is preparing for the ride of a lifetime.
Charlie took one last look in the mirror. She knew that she looked ravishing, but it never hurt to check one last time. And she really wanted to look good for this one. The relationship with Reed had gone even better than she had expected, and a hell of a lot faster. The man certainly was a go-getter. She didn't think she'd had a night to herself since they'd met at the Liberation Party 2 weeks ago. She still wasn't entirely clear what kind of business he was in, but when it came to romance, he sure knew what he wanted. Charlie wasn't going to admit it, but the fact was she was beginning to develop a soft spot for Reed. For one thing, he was indisputably gorgeous. For another, he was a man of the world in a way totally different from the movie stars she usually dated. He spoke knowledgeably of Europe and Africa, of his collection of jade, and of his business interests in China. He'd been everywhere and seen everything. And he was even an ace pilot. Unlike practically everyone else in Hollywood, Charlie hadn't caught the flying bug. She did it when she had to, but it just wasn't that important to her. All of the new aviator fashions and flying magazines that were flooding Hollywood left her cold. But Reed had wanted to take her flying, so that's what they were off to do. It didn't take long before they were in the air, and Charlie was laughing from sheer exhilaration, the wind whipping through her silky curls. Reed had made her put on a helmet when they took off, but she'd immediately ditched it when they got up. This was the most amazing feeling she'd ever had. She loved the feeling of swooping through the clouds, of flying up and over the Hollywood Hills and down across the valley. She'd flown before, of course, but always in big, dull, commercial zeppelins. This was like flying in her dreams, the complete freedom of motion, the feeling that she could go anywhere and do anything. Charlie screamed with delight as Reed pulled back on the control and the plane headed straight up. She looked behind her, and Reed grinned and gave her a thumbs up. Behind him, the ground was receding from them at a dizzying pace. The whine of the little two-seater's engine grew louder as it labored to keep the climb steady. Then, suddenly the engine gave a small cough and died. The plane immediately lost speed and began to tip backwards, further and further, with the earth now above them and sliding past. Charlie screamed again, this time with fear. Behind her, she could hear Reed swearing as he tried to keep the little plane upright. He managed to complete the loop and right the plane, but in spite of the wind that spun the propeller at a high rate, the engine would not start. Charlie heard Reed shout,
There must be a clogged fuel line. Nothing's going to start this engine.
Charlie turned around and screamed over the rushing wind.
What do you mean?
I mean, my dear, that this plane is going to crash. But don't worry, we have a parachute. Unfortunately for you, I'm going to take it. Farewell. It was fun while it lasted.
With a final salute, the formerly charming Reed champion bailed out of the plane, holding onto the one and only parachute. Without Reed's hands on the controls, the plane's nose dropped immediately and the plane went into a steep dive, heading faster and faster towards inevitable doom.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Don't forget to tune in next week for the thrilling next chapter of Charlie Steele and the First Knights. Same time, same channel. Next up, we have an hour of music by the AAW Swing Band. They are sure to get you moving as you cruise those crimson skies.